Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. Today on the show, we have our first ever guest. His name is Brent Charleton, and I'm bringing him on because I met him maybe 4 or 5 months ago. He had a really interesting workshop where I felt like I got a lot of insights about psychology, which is a subject that's fascinating to me. And as many of you know who've been listening to the show, this is something that I particularly struggled with in my 20s. And it's a subject where I particularly feel like it's so hard to get good knowledge about this field. And so I'm really interested in anyone who has anything that seems unique and particularly an interesting system they can share. So I want to welcome you, Brent. Brent, welcome to the Human Flourishing Project.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be your first interviewee.
Well, it's great to have you. And just so people know where we're situated, usually we're in the Laguna Beach studio, so to speak. Today we are in the Redondo Beach studio of Brent, and we're still working on our acoustics in this studio, so you may hear the local drivers here a little bit in the background. So hopefully that adds to the charm of it. So Brent, let's just jump into your background, and then we'll start to develop in terms of your ideas, which I found really interesting. So what got you interested in the study of psychology?
Well, I mean, how far back do you want to go?
I want to go far back, and if it gets slow, I'll speed you up. But I'm really interested in where these things originate, because as I said, you have a really interesting system for thinking about psychological issues, and I'm always interested where those begin.
Right. Well, I think for me, it began with being a kid. And essentially, people would often talk to me about their problems. And I now understand why people would do that, based on kind of the relationship I have with my parents and kind of my mother using me as a sounding board for her problems. But people would approach me, and I didn't understand why. So this was consistent throughout my childhood, where people wanted to talk to me randomly, it seemed like, about what was up with them. And so that got me interested in, like, why do people want to hear what I have to say? And why are they talking to me about what is going wrong or what they need help with? So I was like giving advice, and I'm like 8. So that was pretty weird. And I even knew it was weird at the time. So that's kind of where it started. And then we were very active in church. And so basically, I was kind of known as this kid that is what they would call an exhorter, which this is a religious thing. And I don't really understand all of it. And I don't practice, like going to church all the time and all of that. But I grew up in a born-again Christian church environment, Southern Baptist church. And so they were like, oh, you're like a little exhorter. And it's someone who basically like counsels people. And I was like, okay. And so that kind of got me interested in it. I like talking to people, and they seemed to want to know what I thought, and they wanted my help with things. And I was a good little helper. So that's kind of how it started out. It evolved from there, in that I wanted nothing to do with psychology, actually. And so I was a child actor, and I started acting as a kid. And there was a lot of parallel between characterization and kind of studying a character, learning what to do, and the psychology of people. So that kind of started to come together for me as an adolescent. And so then I ended up moving to San Francisco after undergraduate. And I had no intention of becoming a psychologist or a psychotherapist, actually, even though my undergrad was in psychology. I wanted to be a research psychologist. And then I just was like, I don't really know if I want to do this anymore. This was after undergraduate. So I moved to San Francisco at the .com bust. So that was 2001 is whenever I moved there. And I couldn't get a job doing anything else. And I applied for every other type of job you can imagine. And there was this job posting that kept showing up. Because this is back in the day when you would go to an actual internet cafe and look on Craigslist for jobs. And this job was for Larkin Street Youth Services, which is it's a youth services program. It's actually an international model at this point in San Francisco as a counselor, a drop-in counselor. And inside of me, it was like, that's your job. That's your job. You need to go do that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't have anything to do with it. You don't make any money. Like, who cares about this stuff? And I couldn't get a job, ran out of money. And so I went and applied, and I knew when I applied I was going to get the job, and I did, even though I had no experience. And so that was my first job, working with homeless youth in San Francisco in 2001.
Let me just jump in for 1 second. So what it seemed like you had a pretty strong inclination against becoming a research psychologist, even when you had thought that you would become one. What led to that?
Well, a lot of it was like running rats and kind of the lab work aspect and writing papers, which I could do, but I honestly found kind of boring. And then I was like, well, I don't want to deal with people. God forbid I deal with people. And so I was like, nope, I'm just going to go do something else. And so, my first job out of college was actually I was a publisher. I was an assistant for Penguin Putnam Publishing in New York. I lasted 6 weeks because I couldn't handle it. I was not equipped. And so I ran away to San Francisco because that's what all little New Yorkers do when they can't handle New York. You run off to San Francisco. So that's what I did. So basically, it was just those experiences weren't very fulfilling as far as research psychology. But I was always still a little bit of a researcher and very interested in people and very good at pattern recognition. And so I would start to develop my own kind of theories and thinking, which we can get into later if you want. But basically, like in working with homeless youth, I really felt compelled to do that because I had had what I would call a rough adolescence and childhood. A lot of traumatic events occurred. And I knew that I could be of benefit. And so once I got this job, I started to be like, oh, this is something that I can feel good about in helping these kids. And then what I noticed is that, oh, the case managers make more money than me. And I was like, so I guess I need to go ahead and get some kind of a degree. I'm going to become a social worker or something. But it wasn't like this, like, oh, I feel compelled to help the world. It was like, I want more money and I have this skill set and I don't know what else to do. Keep in mind, I'm 22 years old at this time. So the reason I went to grad school was not for some fancy, lofty, higher reason. It was because I wanted to get a job where I could make more than $30,000 a year. And at that time, this idea that I could still work with people and make change and also be able to afford, I don't know, just the rent with my roommates was motivation enough.
All right, so I want to hear what happens next.
What do you mean?
In your story, in terms of your progression, because at some point you're developing some pretty distinctive ideas and disagreeing with a lot of popular ideas.
Well, I disagreed from the beginning. So basically, by the time I entered graduate school, I had already worked as a counselor with homeless youth, and then I was also working at a methadone clinic in Marin in San Rafael, called Marin Treatment Center, and so. Basically, by the time I went into graduate school, I was still very young. I was only 25, but I had had like 2 or 3 years of hardcore, actual, low-functioning people struggling experience as a counselor. So I go into school, and I'm in this accelerated program at USF, and so you go to school at night, and I was working during the day. And a lot of the things that they were teaching, I was like, that doesn't work, and this is not actually what happens in real life, which is a common experience I now understand for people in graduate school.
So what would be an example of that?
It could be a whole series of interventions, basically, or theories about what's going to create change in someone. There's so many different theories and different things, but basically, what I was being told to do was not what would actually work. And the other thing that I learned about going to grad school for psychology is it's like, okay, here is a theory and what you're supposed to do when a person has this problem. And so some of that would work, some of it wouldn't. And then at the end of the day, what was told to me and everyone else at the school was, you've learned all this stuff, but all that really matters is your relationship with the client. And I was like, what? I just spent $55,000 that I don't have. And at the end of this degree, that's a good school, by the way, at the end of the degree, I'm told it doesn't really matter, it's your relationship. And I was like, oh my God, none of this is actually like proven to do much. And I had learned a lot about the field, and I was like, okay, this is very insight oriented. I get a lot of insight into things, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. And clients would have the same experience. Like, insight to me was not enough. So after graduate school, I continued to work, got licensed, all of those things, but I started a private practice in Noe Valley, which is an affluent neighborhood in San Francisco. And people would come in to see me, and I'd help them with depression or anxiety, kind of the usual things. This was the same when I worked in the methadone clinic too. I'd work with someone on something, and they'd get a little bit better. I don't think it was the theories I was using. It was somewhat the relationship, which I thought was really interesting. And then I had some knowledge and information, but I started just kind of ignoring what I was taught and started to do what I felt I was compelled to do. So it's kind of like a little bit of a natural ability of where I started to use my reactions to the clients as a way to talk with them about what was happening with them, which that's not what you're supposed to do.
Can you explain what that means, using your reactions?
So my emotional internal response to what was occurring, I would keep track of while I was talking to the client.
Mm-hmm.
So they're talking to me about what's up with them, and I'm keeping track of it and noticing their feelings and their thoughts. And I would keep track of my own. And then I would use my own to then inform how I discuss something with them. So I was not someone that would go, and write in a little book. I'd be like, oh, really? Well, that's interesting. Or I would get angry at times. I would express fear at times. I would kind of use myself as an instrument in helping these people to work through their issues. And so that's like not what you're really supposed to do. You're trained to basically be a little bit more of a tabula rasa, and you're just supposed to kind of let the client lead. Mm-hmm. Well, these people are coming to me for help. They have problems. And then I'm supposed to just go, they're going to know what to do. I'm just going to lead them into this understanding, and then that's magically going to take care of it. And I was like, this is total bullshit.
I remember when I think I was 9. Hopefully my parents don't get too upset about this, but I was sent to a psychiatrist when I was 9 because I had a bunch of quote unquote behavioral issues when I was a kid, and I was fighting with my siblings and fighting with my parents and not wanting to do schoolwork and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was sent to this very prestigious psychiatrist, and I would talk to him. And I just remember after a few sessions, I asked him, so what do you think I should do? And he said, oh, that's not my job. And I just felt like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Like I'm just venting, and what is this really accomplishing? And I never did feel like it accomplished very much.
And I understand, and unfortunately that's a common experience. I mean, it does accomplish being witnessed by another person. If the therapist is in any way decent, then they're going to witness you and give you a soft approval of what's occurring. That alone is reparative and helpful, and having some insight into what led you to where you are and maybe what you could do next. But it wasn't directive enough. And I was always highly directive, which you're not supposed to do. But basically I started telling people what to do. And I was like, I think you should do this, this, and this. If this person does this, then do this. And lo and behold, they would actually get a lot better and become more functional. But something else would show up. And so I'd fix one thing and then something else would show up.
Do you remember any particular examples that just stood out to you historically?
Yeah, I mean, one of them was like overeating. People would manage their depression and anxiety. I'd work with them using some of the techniques I had learned, and then also just my own kind of instrument and that kind of stuff. And people would stop being as depressed, but then they'd start acting out in other ways. So it could be like anything that's somewhat extreme. Like I had a client that I was working with on anxiety that then all of a sudden became a gambling addict. And had no history of addiction. There was no, and I was like, I don't understand this. So basically every time I would kind of work with someone and help them to arrive at something or quote, fix it, this new problem would show up. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm really missing something. And my orientation is what it's called, was cognitive behavioral, which is a very popular orientation in psychology. So I would try to work within that framework. This is when I was young. But essentially, those techniques would give a little bit of relief, but I just felt like I was plugging holes all the time. And understand, I was kind of, quote, good at what I was doing. Like I was well respected in town and everything, and I still was like, this isn't really working. So that got me thinking, I'm missing something at the core of people.
With cognitive behavioral, just because some people won't be familiar with that term, what's an example of a cognitive behavioral technique?
Gosh, I don't use them anymore. But a cognitive behavioral intervention or a cognitive technique would be basically like you would identify beliefs that the person has, link it with the behavior that they're doing, and then you would try to change the belief, therefore changing the behavior. That's kind of it in a nutshell how all of the interventions work. So there are specific interventions that are used, but that is what they all are designed to do.
It's so interesting because just from whatever I've studied and looked at, it seems like the cognitive behavioral people tend to be more effective than other common schools of psychology.
It is the most effective, actually. And it's also considered the most effective because it's what is given dollars by the government to do research on. So basically, within the field of psychology, the most popular theorems and ideas, the ones that have the most, quote, efficacy are ones that you can show proof, quote, because this is a pre-paradigmatic science. There's no actually proving anything. But you can show proof through statistical measure that this intervention has made a change for this client, or in that model, this patient.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of like why, essentially, that is been pushed out so much, is you can, quote, prove it through statistical measure. You can't do that with psychodynamic theories. You can't do it as well with, Rogerian theories or Adlerian theories, relationship-focused theorems. You can't do that. So it's basically taking something that's qualitative, like a therapeutic experience, and attempting to quantify it. It can be quantified within a cognitive behavioral structure based on the research. And so it can be proven, well, that's what the government needs to funnel money into it. And that's why it's become the largest. It's not just because it's most effective. It's what everyone's doing because that's what money is given to universities for. And so they've tailored their programs to focus on cognitive behavioral interventions. And what's interesting about your story too is, it's kind of a classic story. Like you got identified as it's called the identified patient. And so basically the issues you were having were family issues. But what we do in this country is say, that's not a family issue. Your child is a problem. So you need to take that child to a psychiatrist and give them lots of drugs. And that's a shame because it's a family problem, And my license is marriage and family therapist. So, of course, I'm going to be more oriented towards that. But understand that you got a family problem, you got identified, and then you're brought in. You should have gone to family therapy.
Wow,
and there are benefits to that. I'm not saying there's no benefits to traditional work. I just don't think it's enough. And so I made something else that I thought maybe was more.
Interesting. Wow. So the family point is fascinating. I want to go back to the cognitive thing because I'm just so you're raising all these subjects and I think, I want to go into this and I want to go into this because there's just as something I want to think about in the future. Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm really interested in how do you validate things, but I can see that certain things can be more suited toward common methods of validation, and that can make them seem more valid than they actually are.
Correct.
In an ultimate sense. Because if you can come up with some testing framework, like with the example that you used of somebody has, I don't know, like they have overeating and then it channels into something else, you could definitely concoct a test where it would seem like wild success, right? CBT totally dealt with this, and yet you notice on a root level it doesn't. Okay, so I want to know what happens next in the story because you're starting to realize, wow, this thing that I'm really good at that is regarded as the best thing is not working in a way that's dissatisfying to you. So where do you go with that?
Well, and I wasn't sure exactly what to do with it at first. And so I was like, well, but I have some ideas of how things should work. But you have to understand, I was really young. And I also had not matured and developed and kind of basically through applying the work that I've built to myself. And so I was like, well, there has to be a way to get to some kind of a core level. And then that was about all I did with it for a little while. I still kept working and
What do you mean? Like, what did core level mean at that time?
At that time, it meant that there was something happening within the person that was at a level that was deeper than I could get to or witness, or they wouldn't be acting out in other ways. So if I was really repairing what was going on with them, and then therefore their depression went away, their anxiety went away, then nothing else should show up. There shouldn't be some other problem. But how psychology is set up and how it's all designed is that what you're really treating are symptoms. So what the first thing that I started to realize is I am treating symptoms, not curing illnesses or, mental disorders, which that's antithetical to the whole way that it's presented by psychology, is that this therapy is going to provide a healing for you, like a cure for you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what it does. It treats symptoms. And it's because it's based on the medical model, just like anything else in Western in the Western world, everything in America is medical model when it comes to mental health. So it is designed to treat these symptoms. Well, that's not enough. You're not actually taking care of anything if you're just treating a symptom. It's kind of like now we're all trying to realize if you just take a pill for something, that may not help you. There may be something else going on at a deeper level, even if it's a physical problem, right? So I started to go, oh my gosh, there's something else underneath that's creating all these symptoms. These are not disorders. These are not the problem. These are symptoms of a fundamental problem. That was the first thing that I started to realize.
Now, how would you differentiate this from, my rough understanding of what the premises of psychoanalysis are? Because with psychoanalysis, it does seem like they're saying there is some deeper level of things going on, and we're going to give you all this insight, and then it's going to resolve it. And I can see how sometimes in relation to cognitive, they seem to have a point, because sometimes it seems to me that cognitive seems superficial, and then the analysts are going fundamental, but then the analysts don't always seem to resolve very much when they go fundamental. It seems like you talk a lot of, about a lot of deep stuff, but then it doesn't get resolved.
If it was resolved, you wouldn't need to go twice a week for 25 years. That's the bottom line. Like, if something isn't resolved after 6 to 8 sessions, then I don't know what the point is. Because basically, like, you're right. An analyst, and there were times when I was like, I want to be a Jungian analyst. I'm going to move back to New York and go to the Jungian Institute, all these different things, because I wanted to go deeper. Insight is not enough. There has to be application. And that was the second thing I realized. I'm like, there is no true application for this insight within any of these models, and with what I'm doing with people either. And so I was like, I want application. So I want insight because it's necessary, but I also want that to translate into what then do I do? There has to be application, or to me the theories are useless, which is a bold statement, especially as a licensed person. But I'm telling you, insight alone doesn't do much. It's a very special conversation that somebody has with their therapist. And those are special conversations. I'm not saying they're not important or that they're not helpful, but insight is not enough, or people would not keep coming back all the time. They wouldn't have other problems that they're engaging in, acting out in. If you were really getting to the root of the problem, not treating the symptom, but the root of the problem, then those things wouldn't occur. So I wanted application, and I was pissed. I was angry that there was no application because I needed it too. No one becomes a therapist because everything's okay. You're all messed up and you're trying to figure it out. And so then you go to school, and it's a way for you to be like, well, I'm going to work on other people, not myself. But anybody that wants to be a therapist is kind of crazy, or a psychologist. It's the truth. And so basically I was like, this isn't working for me. And so I started moving into a place where I was like, you know what? I have to build something for myself. And that's actually what I do now. These theories and application are pretty well fleshed out. It's like version 7 of everything. But that's when I developed the original work. I was like, I need something for myself.
All right, keep going. I'm riveted. I want to know what happens next.
Okay, so I started to seek out opportunities to learn about this thing I had heard of called core issues. And this was this was like in 2005 or 2006. And so I was introduced to the work of Pia Mellody. And I was like, and she's pretty famous actually. She has lots of books. And she was a nurse in a treatment center called the Meadows, which is in Arizona. And she's credited with it. I'm not sure that, like anything else in psychology or any other type of science or field, things grow from other things. But basically, she developed this kind of basic tenet of what she called the 5 core issues. And these core issues are based on infancy and children, things that she noticed. It's very much a nursing perspective, which I won't get into all that, but it's a certain way to look at the world. And so she developed these ideas, and I found them fascinating. But me being me, I didn't actually agree with all of the core issues, and I kind of thought, I don't know about this one or this one. But I was intrigued.
What are just some examples of the types of things she would classify as core issues?
So it's not a type of behavior. It's like a way to look into a person. Mm-hmm. So she was like, people have issues around their value. People have issues around vulnerability. She had all these V words. It was like value, vulnerability. Gosh, I don't remember.
That's enough of an example.
But basically, like, she had a theory that these core issues are what is wrong with people. That's the way that they're off, are these 5 things. And she didn't really preach this, but basically I started to think, okay, everything is related to these core things. So I got a job in Mississippi at this place called Pine Grove Behavioral Health. It's a much longer story, but essentially in 2007 or whatever, I went there to write a program for the hospital. So I was really good at doing programming because I had a specialty in addiction and trauma and all these things I developed by then. And so I was very good at writing programs, which meant like you're having a problem and you're going to go to a clinic. Well, somebody writes that program. So I was starting to do that at that time because I was working on my own stuff as well and started to write stuff. And I would develop programs within the clinics I was in, like art programs, or I would do case management programming, basically building a therapeutic program for people to go through. And so they hired me as a contract employee to redo their eating disorder program for women and then their men's program for substance abuse. And the main reason I wanted to go there and why I was willing to even go all the way over there and do that is that they used some of the PMLD's work around core issues in what they called their family program. And so I was exposed to it in a really real, visceral way as it was working. And at the same time, I was designing a new program for them. So I learned about this and I got introduced to it. And that really is what started me to go, okay, wait, I think I know what these core issues are, but I don't think there's 5. I think there's 4. And I think they're slightly different. And so I started to develop my own, but based on what I had learned from her, and then also work with Patrick Carnes, who was a part of the same school as PMLD, and he's actually the father of sex addiction. He invented the whole concept that there is such thing as sexual addiction, and he has a program at this hospital called the Gentle Path Program. So I was exposed to him and his work, and all of it was kind of based on, hey, there's this thing at the core. So I changed it, added in things that I thought were important, and this was the main problem. Yet again, here's all this great stuff on core issues, and there is no application.
Well, so what at this point at least, what did you think the 4 core issues were?
Worth, what you're worth, your safety, how safe you are at any individual time, the issue of perfection, which is really about being a human, so whether you're all defective or whether you feel that you're perfect, and then the issue of needs. So worth, safety, perfection, and needs are the 4 core issues that I really zeroed in on and kind of, quote, defined from what I had learned from Pia's work and also just all my experiences working with clients, because I had a lot of really intense placements as a young therapist. I always sought out the most difficult people because I wanted to learn what was really going on with people at a deep level. So those are what I consider the 4 core issues. When you get off on those, in other words, they're not issues as in problems. It's kind of like a lens through which we filter our experience.
So yeah, I'm trying to get a sense and help listeners get a sense, because I've taken one of your workshops before, but just when you're saying they're core, does that mean that they're always with you, that they're with you in every interaction?
They're always with you, whether you're with somebody else, whether you're alone, whether you're talking to someone, whether you're sitting on the toilet, whatever you're doing, they're always there. And so it's, what am I worth right now? How safe am I right now? How perfect am I right now? And what are my needs and wants in this moment? And so what people don't understand is they're literally distilling all information into those 4 boxes, those 4 categories. And it drives behavior. It drives reactions, which then goes into behaviors. So I redid it to what I thought it should be, and I developed application.
So just one more thing before application. So when you would see, let's say, somebody who's struggling with addiction and they would be engaging in certain behavior, you would be able to see, oh, this is where they are with regard to needs, and this is where they are with regard to perfection.
This is where they are.
That would be explanatory of their behavior in a more fundamental way than the other frameworks that you had access to.
You said it way better than I did. Yes, that's exactly right. And so basically it started to be a way to kind of categorize what was actually happening with the person. And then the challenge was, how do I develop interventions that deal with that? And I was like, I don't even know.
Okay, one more thing before application. So let's just say I take when I'm young, just a typical thing. Let's say I'm 16 years old and it's before I've had my first girlfriend. Or actually I remember I'm 15 years old and I like a girl and I'm afraid to talk to her. And that's experiencing all kinds of intense emotion. So you're saying you would look at me and you'd say, okay, this person is in a certain place with regard to his needs and with regard to his worth. And that is driving this thing, whereas I just experience it as I'm afraid to talk to a girl that I like.
Right, exactly. So that's your experience, but understand that really correlates most with the issue of safety. I'm afraid to talk to her. And so in my model, if you have something going on in safety in what I call the child area, or a child ego state, which is like a frame of mind, that's going to correlate to what I call exposure. So you were feeling, if this is you, I'm assuming it's yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is me.
Okay.
Was me.
So you were feeling exposed, and that exposure is I'm afraid to talk to her. There are specific thoughts linked to that exposure, and once those are uncovered, they can be dealt with in the technique that I've created. Okay, but you also would have issues around worth. I feel less than is what would be happening in that moment. I'm not able to do this. I'm not worthy of talking to this girl. She's not going to like me, these kinds of things. So you have a less than going on around worth. You'd have an exposure around safety. And then on the issue of perfection, you would probably feel defective in your ability to engage.
I just nodded, I should say, because there's no camera on us.
Not on this one. Yeah, so you would feel defective. And then on needs, you would maybe be needy for her approval and or attention. So what I developed works at that level on addressing those things, the things that are underneath what you are then noticing, like, oh, I'm just afraid to talk to her. And so we go much deeper, and then we apply what I call correction to those thoughts. Because understand this method that I've created, it is cognitive, behavioral. There are elements of it in there. There's also psychodynamic elements. There are Rogerian elements. There are Adlerian elements. Like, all the theories are somewhat represented, not on purpose. You have to understand, I just kind of started to know what to do. It was very strange. It just started to show up. And I was like, oh, well, I need to identify what this thinking is for this client. What is it that they're thinking that's linked to this issue of, for example, exposure, or this issue of safety, right? Or this issue of needs. And then if I can work with them on changing that thought, maybe I'll be able to make a real change. They'll be able to make a change.
You mentioned parent and child, and I know that you have this categorization. Did you have this early on, the idea that there's a parent state and a child state for these different core issues?
In Pia's work, there is stuff around a child ego state, a teen ego state, and then I think she might call it adult. I don't remember. I call it adult, functional adult. But essentially, I learned that from her. If she's the one that invented it.
Well, yeah, whoever invented it. So can you elaborate a little bit on that and how that relates to the four core issues?
And I'll do that within my framework because I work within my own stuff. But essentially, on the issue of worth, well, let me back up a little bit. So you have the four core issues I already went over, which I'll go into in a second. But you also have these things called ego states. And an ego state is a frame of mind. And it's like a filter. It's like a certain filter you have on that you're filtering your experiences through. And so there's a child ego state, and that's like a little bitty kid, okay? And like maybe 0 to 6 is what I categorize it as. And then you have a teen ego state, and that's ages 7 to 17. And then you have, quote, an adult, but really a functional adult ego state that is, 18 and older. So this is like a way of thinking, a frame of mind. A little bitty kid, a teenager, or an adult. So if I'm in a child place around my worth, then I am less than you. I'm not worth as much as you. If I'm in a teen place around the very same core issue of worth, then I'm not less than you, I'm better than you. And so I get all puffed up.
So why is that? Why do you associate one with child and one with teen?
Because it's not a developmental theory, but it's a great way to kind of understand that, like, you have kind of regressed, essentially, into something that's very, very young or something that's more teen-like. And so it's just a great way to understand it and like work within it.
But is there something inherent about just being very young where you do feel exposed in a certain way?
You are exposed. So the reality is whenever you're a child, like an actual little kid, you are a little bit less than. You don't know as much. You don't know what's going on. There's all these big people around you, and you don't feel quite as worthy. So these ego states, it's not like that's what the nature of the ego state is based in real development. So a child is feeling a little less than. You are having that go on. You are very exposed, right? You can't fend for yourself. You can't do things for yourself. It's not possible. You're a little bitty kid. And there is a defective quality. You don't know how to do things, all right? Now, you don't necessarily think I am defective when you're a little kid, but, to answer your question, this is kind of based on this development, of an actual child. And then if you also are very needy as a kid. So that child state are those things. It's a less than, it's an exposure, it's a defective, and it's a needy. And so people bounce into those as adults because basically whatever led to that, what they didn't get basically from their parents and the experiences they've had get triggered again because they're still alive in there. They're still going on. There's still a little bitty kid in there that's responding to those things. And so there had to be a way for me to work with that kid, that child. And then the same thing for the teen, right? Think about a teenager. A teenager is better than. Think about when you were a teen. You're better than everybody else. No one knows anything. You're also very closed as a teen. I know what to do. I'm already grown. Don't tell me what to do. I'm 15 years old. That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then there's a thing about being perfect too. Well, I don't have any problems. I'm perfect. I don't make mistakes. That's for other people. Or I learn, my mistakes are great because then I learn from them, which a lot of adults say, which is also very teen-oriented thinking. And then there's a needlessness. I don't need you, I don't need anybody. Leave me alone. So those correlate with worth, safety, perfection, and needs.
But there's something unreal about those, right? Because it's not that they're actually needless or that they're actually superior. I mean, isn't it some sort of rebellion against protection against the first?
In a developmental theory, but understand it is a state of mind. Those ego states are a state of mind that you lapse into based on actual experiences that you had. And so you have the 4 core issues. If you bounce into a child or a teen one, then you're what I call triggered, which is not my term. And in fact, that term has been co-opted by millennials, but which it means something else now. But essentially, you are thrown off. So you start thinking and feeling as if you are a little kid or you are a teenager. And those thoughts are specifically linked to less than and better than, exposed and closed, defective and perfect, needy and needless. And then there's this adult state, which is the middle of those. So if I'm in an adult place around my worth, I'm equal to you. So things can happen and you may know more than me and other stuff, but I never feel less than you essentially. It's just like we're both equal. And I'm not saying it just to be nice. Okay, I'm not really interested in that so much. I'm saying the truth is that if you're here on the planet, then you are actually inherently equal to everybody else. You may have a different skill set that is rewarded differently by the society. But if you are on the planet, you're supposed to be here. And so then you're equal to everyone else. And we get triggered in a way based on our childhood and what we don't get from our parents, what isn't done well enough, basically. We get triggered in a way where we go, oh, wait, I've forgotten that I'm equal. I'm not actually equal. I'm less than you. Or you're better than me, and I hate you for it, which is what's going on right now. And at large in society, there's a lot.
I thought you meant in this conversation. I was like,
no. And so, the same is true for safety and, needs and perfection. So, you bounce into these, and so if I'm in an adult place around my worth, then I'm equal to you. Anything can happen between us, and inside, I don't feel less than and small and tiny, or I don't feel all big and puffed up and being better than you. I can just remain on a level. And so you have to get rid of the triggering, the original traumas, basically, that cause you to bounce into that less than or better than. Around safety, if I'm in an adult place, then I can do a really good job of protecting myself from you, and I can contain me from being offensive to you. That's an adult state, not exposed and raw and vulnerable like a little child, and not all closed up like a teen. Around perfection, if I'm in an adult place, I'm realistic. So basically, I'm going to make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that I'm a mistake. As opposed to thinking, oh my God, I did something wrong, I'm broken, I'm a piece of crap, I'm defective. That's the child state. The teen state is like, I don't make any mistakes, I'm perfect. Usually it's you have the problem, not me. Or it's holding yourself to a perfect standard all the time, which is something that I really struggled with, especially at the time that I started developing these theories. That was one of my primary. And then around needs, the adult state is that you're aware. So you're aware of what you need and want, and you can make it known. So you're not all needy, that insatiable neediness that people experience. And you're not all needless either, So the adult state is almost like a non-triggered state, if you will. But it's actually kind of the true state. It's like the reality of things. But inside of us, based on our traumas, essentially, I'm going to say trauma is such a strong word, but basically anything less than nurturing as a trauma when you're a child. And we just don't have a lot of words in English besides trauma. So people say things like trauma with a little t, which I always thought was cute, but that was like a really 2000s term psychologists would use. But because of those, it causes you to bounce back into when you were a child or when you were a teen.
I'm just trying to think of examples for myself, because there's definitely something about this that resonated with me pretty early. And one interesting use case of this that I've discovered in my life is I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a hobby. And that's really interesting because it's a form of combat, which is a sort of primal thing. And it involves, particularly at the beginning I noticed, it involved very strong feelings of inferiority and then superiority bouncing back and forth. And I've told this story before, but early on, maybe I was a month or two in it, there was a guy who came in and we had a 5-minute sparring round, and he finished me 7 times. He made me submit or tap out 7 times. And then I asked him, how long have you been training? And he said, it's my 2nd day. And I went into my car
God.
and I cried. And it was like, so I just felt like worthless. And it was so, but then I remember other times, early on, I finished this guy and he's been training for 3 months and I've been training for a week. So, I feel better then. And it was just fascinating to see these things emerge. And I started to get a feel for, I don't really like either of these things. Like, it seems like the superiority thing feels good, but actually it's tied with that other thing in a certain way.
It's not only tied, it's a direct response to that other thing. So the child thing is going on. The less than that you're talking about is going on. And then the teen shows up to deal with that child less than. The teen shows up and says, no, you're not less than other people. You're not less than this guy that you beat. You're better than him. And let me tell you why. Because you've only been training for this long. And it's a way to compensate for the child's stuff. So if you're in a teen place at any one of those boxes, like you're better than, or you're closed, or you're trying to be perfect, or you're needless, that's what you're seeing on the surface. In other words, it's a deep surface, but that's kind of like the behaviors that you're engaging in outside of yourself. But the only reason that even shows up is because you have this other part of you that's a child that's feeling less than about jiu-jitsu, that's feeling exposed about jiu-jitsu and feeling needy and feeling defective. So then your teen's going to show up because it's a protective mechanism. The teen ego state is, another word for it is your defense structure. It is your defenses. But you try to get people to work on their defense structure and see how well that goes. But if you tell people like, hey, this is your teen and this is exactly what he's doing and he needs your help and he's living inside of you, it's you as a teenager, then all of a sudden they're willing to help or they're willing to do something different.
Interesting.
So you're literally kind of dismantling defenses. If I told people that I was teaching them how to dismantle themselves and that what a lot of it was actually kind of personality restructuring, I'd have no clients or interest because that sounds scary and weird. But it is a way to restructure what goes on with you.
I find I'm just thinking of examples of myself in part because I'm hoping that listeners start to think of examples of themselves. I actually find it very exciting whenever I find something that, there's something I could be doing better in this realm, because there's so much upside to learning. Learning anything good in the realm of psychology is a very high upside. I mean, You're happier for the rest of your life. And you're already as happy as you are or unhappy as you are. So like discovering something quote unquote wrong or that can be improved is actually that's a very positive kind of thing. So I'm thinking, I remember, and I still get shades of this sometimes, but I remember earlier in my business career in particular, there was a similar feeling of being a child in certain ways. But then there would also be situations where maybe the CEO of a company took a liking to me and I felt superior in a certain way. And there was a certain charge that I would get off that. And then at a certain point I realized, I started viewing that as a very insecure thing. And that was a big breakthrough to have a lot of trouble feeling that the superiority actually didn't feel superior. It actually felt childlike.
Do you know why it's an insecure thing? What makes it insecure? I mean, the reason it's insecure is that it's left up to the other person. So basically, it's like, if you acknowledge me, CEO, then all of a sudden I can feel good about myself and be superior. And see, it's linked to the other person. And that's not cool. Because basically, everything that's happening internally at this core level on these core issues is linked to another person. So you don't want things to remain that way, because then you're going to bounce around, like your worth is going to bounce between less than and better than. Your safety is going to bounce between exposed and closed. In other words, it's looking to external sources to make sure that you're okay along those 4 core issues that I mentioned earlier. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work well. And basically, that's why you have a lot of people in the world saying, hey, you made me have a feeling that I don't like because I don't like what you said. You better change that feeling, or I'm going to ruin your business and your marriage and your career through social media. That's a lot of why that's actually happening, because everyone has like been trained in this basically codependent way that what someone else does or says changes me on the inside. And the reality is it's none of your business what someone else is doing or what they think. If you don't like what it is that they have to say, then don't listen to them. But they're entitled to their opinion, and they're not making those feelings in you. Those are your own feelings that you're making from your thoughts. And so you are triggered. That person is a catalyst. They're not the cause.
I see. So to the extent someone is in the functional adult state, they don't have nearly that kind of triggering from somebody else saying something quote unquote offensive.
No, people say offensive things to me all the time, and they can say whatever they want because I get to decide what I do with it. It doesn't impact me at that level anymore.
But you have to be in a certain state, right? Because some people could just say, oh, I decide, but they see something. I hear celebrities say this about Twitter. They'll just say, somebody says, I get 500 positive comments and 1 negative comment, and I think about that negative comment for 5 days.
And the problem is that celebrity, which I know a lot of them too, that celebrity or that individual, they don't have to be a celebrity. They don't have any boundaries. And so basically whatever happens outside, this one comment goes right in there, triggers them along worth, safety, perfection, and needs. And then they're having a terrible 5 days. That's nuts. That's just what that person thinks. You don't have to think that. But you automatically bounce into however you're built to be triggered by it on those 4 core issues. When reality is that's just what that person thinks. If you have boundaries, you get to say, well, what do I think? And maybe I can't please every person all the time. But maybe I should get off Twitter is the other thing.
But they're probably, I'm sure they're getting off positively too much when they get the praise.
Yes,
too.
But it's very fragile as we're talking about.
Right.
And it's all based on, by the way, what some rando says on Twitter.
Right.
It's crazy.
Just to bring this back to jiu-jitsu, not that that's a relatable example to anybody, but if you think about competition and winning and losing, no, I just think because in jiu-jitsu there's this idea that you have to learn to be okay with losing. But it was very helpful to me when I thought, in order to love losing or to just still enjoy jiu-jitsu even when I lose, I have to have a different attitude toward winning. Like if I don't want to feel inferior when I lose, I can't feel superior when I win.
Well, but to say I can't do that is not going to make it go away. And see that the thing is what this is about, what this correction method and technique is about, is that it's a way to change the fact that you
So let's talk about that in terms of so I feel like we have a much better sense now of what these core issues are, and then there are these different ego states for each one. So tell us about how you developed your method for actually dealing with these in a non-superficial way.
Well, I started to realize that besides application, I wanted to develop something that people could use to work with on themselves. So one of the main problems I had with psychology is that it fosters dependency on the therapist. It's basically a codependent relationship in a lot of ways. And so I was like, I want something that people can use without me. And when I told colleagues that that's what I was working on, they're like, you're crazy. You mean you're going to build in your obsolescence? You're not going to have any clients. And I was like, no. If they get what they need and it goes well, I'll have plenty of clients. And frankly, I've never wanted for clients. And it's because people make actual change. So go back to your original question.
We're just getting into how you actually discovered this process of corrections.
So I wanted the application piece, and it had to be something you worked with on your own. And so I started to develop first the intensive. And so that intensive kind of teaches these core elements. The workshop you went to is a version of that intensive. Started to teach these core elements. And then that kind of naturally led to, I need to work with this child and with this teen. But I need the client to work with their own child and teen. So I can identify what it is. And, that child or teen is thinking something. Because remember, I had a cognitive background.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, there's a thought happening that's making these feelings that this person's having. And so there's this teen thought or child thought that's making these feelings. So how am I going to get that to change? And I was like, well, what if we talk to them? And I was like, okay, so if I have people talk to their inner child, if you will, talk to their teen, maybe that could help. And I was like, oh, that's right. This is about like reparenting, which is a common type of thing in psychology. And I was like, this is an opportunity to reparent. This child is having this reaction. So that's a little bitty kid. They're having this thought. They're having these feelings. I know what they are. I'm going to go in, quote unquote, and parent that child out of what's occurring. Take them out of the driver's seat. And so essentially that's how it kind of began, was I think I need to talk to them. And then I also had learned this technique that is called chair work, or that I call chair work. And basically it's a very powerful kind of accelerate type technique where you uncover all the traumas that people had as a kid, and we basically go and imagine you're talking to your parents and you talk to them about it. And it's very powerful for people, frankly. And so that's actually how everybody starts with me in a private. Like if they're going to be a private client, you start with this intensive and you do this chair work piece, because it gets rid of a lot of the gook that's in there, that's coming up the works. It flushes it out very quickly. So understand, I had this intensive. I knew I needed to talk to the kids. And then I had this chair work piece. And I was like, how can I do chair work without it being chair work? I need some version of chair work that's lighter and that can be done online, believe it or not. Because I was working online back in the day. And chair work, the original version, the one I do with clients, has to be in session. And so I was like, this chair work thing really works great. So how can I have a version of that I can do online with clients and that they can also maybe do with themselves? And I'm not kidding at all. It literally just showed up. I mean, like fully formed. Like it was like, just do this and have this piece and have this piece. And so I tried it because I was always into taking risks. And so I just was like, I know what to do. And so basically, the first client that I started doing the corrections with, that kind of stuff, I saw that it really made a big difference. They had a huge shift based on us talking to their child and teen. And then I started to become very formulaic, and I started to understand what worked better, what didn't work as well. And essentially it was through trial and error of working with clients. And I would tell them, I don't know exactly what this is going to do, but we're going to try this thing. And they trusted me, and they would go through that process. And it worked like a charm to basically reduce these blocks. Because it's actually these mental emotional blocks that are causing people to bounce into these child and teen states. And so if you can talk to that child that's having that go on and that teen, you're essentially removing those blocks for them, with them.
Can you give an example without betraying any confidentiality, at least schematically, of the kind of block that would exist and then how this process would work?
Sure. I mean, you could use the block that you had at 15.
Perfect.
So like basically you're feeling exposed. So what you would do is you notice the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought was, I'm afraid to talk to her.
Right.
So identify the thought. Great. One steps down. And then what feelings does that thought make? And we need to kind of know what the feelings are too. And so we would identify what those are, because you need to reflect back the thoughts and the feelings to the child,
mm-hmm.
because that's you witnessing them. And all real kids want, and all humans want is witness and approval. So that was built in by reflecting back to that child, the one inside of you, your thoughts and feelings. So, but we're still on the prep work part, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. And so right there, you know, okay, this is exactly what's going on and what I need to address with this child because they're trying to figure it out. They're stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
So then it started to form like a template for me of, okay, you got to identify the thoughts and feelings, and then you need to come up with some wisdom. Remember, it's kind of like a reparenting. So what am I going to tell this little boy who's all exposed and is saying, I'm afraid to talk to her? What advice would I give him? And so you start writing down what it is that you would tell him. And then this example is a little different because you are talking about something that happened when you were actually a kid.
Right.
But if you were triggered by that now
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, which I work with men on this all the time, if you're triggered that way now in relationship to women, you want to find what I call historical data. When did I first learn this? When did I first feel exposed? And for example, if you were an adult doing it, like now,
Mm-hmm.
that would be your historical data of what it was like when you were 15.
Right.
And so you write that down. And then we put those pieces together in a very particular way that I call a correction. And there's a template that you just fill out and go through. But you reflect back the thoughts and feelings to the child. You tell them where it came from. And it comes from during childhood, things that we don't get. So ways we're treated less than nurturing by our parents or caregivers, coaches, society, peers, peer teasing, things like that. That's that historical data piece. You reflect that back. And then in the wisdom section, you explain your wisdom, your pointers for them. And also you comment on the historical data, like why it wasn't cool that occurred. And then if it's the child, you do what I call let them off the hook. So you explain all this and you say, I see you. I see what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Let me help you with it. But after all that's done, you're like, you know what? You don't have to go talk to girls. I'll go do it for you. So you take over for the child, and that's you as the adult talking to them. You then have removed the block, believe it or not, because it sounds too simple and a little bullshitty, frankly, but it works. And that's all that I care about. So basically, you talk to them, you reflect everything back, and then it removes it. And so you get a release. Then, so what happens is the next time you then go try to talk to a girl, you are not as triggered. You may not be triggered at all, but I never intended it to work that way. It does sometimes do that where it'll just totally remove the block, but all I wanted was a way to step in whenever you're lost in your triggering and being highly reactive.
Why do you call it a block?
Because there are energy channels in your body, like Chinese medicine, you can look up all the different kind of energy pathways. And so these energetic pathways in your body can get blocked up. And what they can get blocked up with is mental and emotional energy, things that are unresolved. And it blocks up the works. It kind of starts to gum up everything. And then it causes you to bounce into this child and teen state. So the reason I call it a block is that it's something that is a block to you, but I also believe it is actually a mental, emotional, energetic block in your actual body. And so that may be a little out there for some people, and it can't even be for clients. They don't have to focus on that. I believe that the energy is in your body, and that's a problem. But you are blocked in your ability to then go talk to the girl. So we got to remove that block. That block is the thinking and the feeling that's happening within that child ego state in your example. So if you remove that, you're no longer blocked from going and talking to the girl.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to switch the example a tiny bit just so I can maybe relate to more. So I'm not trying to go into my own thing, and this is not something on my mind at all, but I'm just thinking, so when I'm just thinking of just as schematic example, because that thing, I imagine if I were going through this, that thing as a teen would even be late, and it might even be that, a big thing was, let's say when I was 7 or 8 years old, like I would get called ugly by my peers. And, that was something that was, even I can feel it now as I'm even saying it, like, oh, wow, that's something that I remember and I feel. Yeah, there's something there. And then I can see, wow, I'll bet that related to a whole bunch of other things, and including probably being very particular about other people's looks later and kind of the teen relation. So I imagine that's the kind of thing where that might be the gold that you hit upon with somebody you see. Oh, that's where.
That is an example of historical data.
Yeah,
is what
historical data.
What you're talking about. And so basically, like, you do arrive at, frankly, incredible levels of insight about why you do a bunch of different things. But here's the beauty of it. What I discovered is that if you make a correction and remove a block based on one area of context, like let's say talking to a girl, because you're working at a core level, that kind of extrapolates to all the areas of your life. So you don't feel as exposed in general about a lot of other things. And so, you know, like you arriving at this historical data piece, you're going to use that for that particular block.
Mm-hmm.
But when you change that, it's at such a core level, it kind of bleeds into other things. So it has this subtle effect, like where you're like, I'm not as worried about what my business partner is going to think about me right now. That's weird. I normally really care what he or she thinks. Huh. But it's because you've done a correction on something else that's related to exposure and what people think.
Doesn't it that makes sense to me in terms of also the way it seems to arise, because don't we sometimes overgeneralize from we have one experience in one area and then it
But you can't help it
as a kid.
But you can't help it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that gets in there.
Right.
You know.
But it's good that it's exciting that you can not only do these like things get bunched together in an unhelpful way, they can get bunched together in a helpful way.
Absolutely. And it is super exciting because I actually did not anticipate that at all. I understand this was made in real time, working with myself, working with other clients. And then over time, I started to see kind of longitudinal effects. And like whenever clients would come back and be like, no, you don't get it. I'm just not worried about this other thing either. And I'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, essentially, I had to catch up to what I had made. And now I understand how all of it works and can explain it very well. But at first it was like, well, this works and I'm not exactly sure why. And I was shocked that it would bleed into other areas of people's lives, even though it makes sense. It took me a while to really get that. Like I was like, oh, yeah, of course, you're working at a core level. It's going to change everything.
You've mentioned a few times in passing just how childhood relates to this, and you've mentioned witness and approval, but can you just talk a little bit directly about what we don't get in childhood that leads to these child and teen states being maintained in adulthood?
The main thing is that anything less than nurturing is abusive to a child. Anything less than nurturing. So all kids want is witness so they can be seen. I see you. And approval. You don't have to approve of the behavior, by the way, because kids have a lot of behaviors that are not approvable, if you will, right? We have to socialize them to some degree, but you still approve of the child. Like, this behavior is not okay, but you're still okay. And so every time, that's not what people get. What they usually get is a bunch of shame. Like, you're disappointing me, you're not supposed to do it this way, what you did is wrong, you're not good at this, those kinds of things. So anytime you're treated less than nurturing, you pick up shame from your caregivers. And that shame gets inside of you and makes what I call a ball of gook. Because I don't use fancy language anymore. I don't need it. You make a ball of gook, a big shame ball in there. That's that block I'm talking about that starts to come up the works. You know? So does that answer your question?
Yes. And one thing that you mentioned, shame, reminded me of something, and we were talking before the show just about certain things that I learned during the workshop. And one thing I found really fascinating and that helped me immediately was you had a certain breakdown of feelings. And I believe you had eight, I don't know, like fundamental feelings. And
the 8 core emotions.
And what are they? Can we remember them all?
Yeah, of course. So you have like fear, anger, shame, pain, guilt, love, joy, and passion. Was that 8?
Yeah, that was it. And so, interestingly, 5 are negative or more negative.
Right. Well, I don't consider them negative.
You consider them dark.
I call them lighter and darker because there's no such thing as a bad feeling. Your feelings are your feelings. The problem is that you learn that some of them are not okay. That creates a lot of problems and a lot of shame. So yes, you have more dark feelings than lighter feelings. And that's the gig. Essentially, this whole human experience thing is a rather dark experience. And I don't mean that in like I'm a dark person, I want to be moody or some, crap about that. I'm saying like it is a darker experience. And a lot of life actually is around the issue of pain or the feeling of pain. I would say about 60% of the human experience is one of pain. Emotional pain, physical pain, etc. It doesn't mean the other feelings aren't there and they're not important. But most of life has a darker feel. This is a growth plane. This plane of existence is one that's oriented towards growth. Well, one of the gifts of pain, because all these core emotions have gifts, even the darker ones, the gift of pain is growth. So in order to grow, you have to experience some pain. I'm not making the rule. I'm telling you that's how this works. So essentially, it's like if you don't have some pain, you're not going to grow. And in my thinking, this whole plane of existence is a growth plane where you're learning how to grow and to change. And so you're going to have a lot of pain. All right? But it's just pain. It's not the end of the world. You're supposed to have darker feelings. There are gifts to each one of them, just like there are gifts to the lighter feelings. You know, this is why I don't believe in positive psychology, which I'm not even online, and I get crap online about that. Like I don't even do social media. People comment on it, you know, but you can't just focus on what's positive and that's going to pump you up. That's going to fall over like a house of cards. You have to integrate what's also darker and understand that all of those feelings are okay. You're supposed to be having them or they wouldn't be there. They're supposed to be there.
Okay, this is raising a bunch of interesting things at once, and so I'll start with what I realized in particular when a couple of things about those 8 feelings. One thing you mentioned is that with each of them, there are ways that I forget what you call them, but basically there are more kind of words that so I remember with shame, you would say, you know,
perceptions.
Perception. So you had mentioned that with shame, for example, sometimes someone would say, I'm embarrassed, or they'd say something where it didn't quite zero in on that core feeling. And I found that really struck me and has struck me ever since. I've used the word shame infinitely more now to describe my own feelings than I would then, because I realized, if I say I'm embarrassed or something like that, I'm not really fully acknowledging the emotion. And it was definitely true with anger. I would not even like to think that I ever got angry. And I would in fact take pride. And then I realized, oh wow, I am angry.
You'd be very angry if you'd never noticed it before, because basically it just gets pushed down and gets pushed down and gets pushed down. But what you're kind of intimating about is that, you know, you have the core emotion and then you have varying intensities of those emotions.
Well, thought words, I think.
And I call them thought words or perceptions. And so basically the thought word, for example, for like shame might be I'm embarrassed. I'm just embarrassed.
Right.
Right. Or like pain, you know, it might be sad, it might be lonely. They each have, these thought words have different levels of intensity, but they're talking about the same exact feeling. Mm-hmm. So like joy, right? Like I'm happy or I'm elated, right? So basically they have different intensity levels, and we have all these different thought words that relate to these core feelings, and all they're describing is intensity. But what people have been taught by psychologists, thank you very much, is that all of those are different feelings. There's 58 different feelings last time I checked. There's like all these charts they put in children's classrooms, which is a mistake. Mm-hmm. That's like, oh, you're feeling this, you're feeling whatever the thought word is. And the reality is it goes back to one of those 8 core emotions. If you know what those 8 core emotions are and understand the thought words are just dealing with your level of shame around feeling it, whatever it is, then it can be very informative and helpful to you. Because see, you've got to reflect back to yourself what you're thinking and feeling. That's you witnessing yourself. Mm-hmm. We do that with our child and teen in the work that I do. But you also I encourage people just to practice like, hey, look, I'm having a particular feeling. And I know what it is. And it's a core feeling. It's not just, oh, I'm feeling, you know, blank, blank, blank. But you go into what it actually is. I'm glad you do that. I think it's good. At least for your own knowledge. You could still say I'm embarrassed, but know that embarrassment is shame.
Yeah, no, I just started using the feeling, the direct feeling words, just because I found it.
I wonder how do people respond to you?
Well, it's mostly when I'm talking to myself.
Okay, good. That's good.
But sometimes, you know, if I'm talking to someone I'm close with, like my girlfriend, I'll definitely use the word shame or anger or something like that, because, and I found particularly with those 2 feelings, it was very empowering and revealing to realize, oh wow, I have a fear of acknowledging that I feel these. I mean, I have shame around
acknowledging anger, for example, right? Because what do we always say? Like, oh, I'm not angry. I'm just frustrated.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, look out. Anger is all bad and dangerous, but I'm just frustrated. Well, guess what? Frustration is anger. It's a thought word. It's just a smaller amount. Or I'm irritated. Maybe that's a little bit more of an intensity of the feeling of anger, you know? But we are trained, and everyone trains their own kids, because we're all trained this way too, that these feelings are bad and they're not supposed to be there. Well, that creates problems. It makes a block, makes a ball of goo. You got to acknowledge that you have feelings. There's nothing wrong with them. Nothing at all. In fact, they have gifts. They're like a medicine. They're there to help you, to give you clues and inform your life. They're linked to survival. which I go into you remember when I did that in the workshop,
Mm-hmm.
talking about survival, they're biologically, evolutionarily driven. So you need to know what they are and own them and know that they're okay. You don't get to hold other people responsible for your feelings, though. And I'm sorry I keep going back to this kind of thing, but I'm so up on this right now about the stuff that's happening in the world, social media wise, and on the news, and the polarity of our culture and the government and everything. It's like, look, I'm having a feeling and you made me have it, so you have to stop doing that. That feeling is your own. You made it. You don't get to hold other people hostage because you're having feelings about what someone else does. Mind your own damn business. Let them do what they do. You do what you do. You don't have to take it so personally. But people don't have a boundary structure. They don't understand these very basic things like ego states, core issues, boundaries, feelings, and they have no way to apply them. Well, I have a way to apply it, and that's what's been really exciting, is to see and humbling too, frankly, to see actual change in people based on having an application. I feel like it's a disservice that we have this field called psychology that doesn't have application. I think it's wrong. I really do.
With the feelings, you talk about, so there are these 8 feelings, and they're all, you don't think of them as certainly good or bad, and there's dark and light, but they're all part of life. And you mentioned that life has a certain amount of darkness, and you're saying 60%. Whatever that is, how does somebody, so I totally get that that refusing to accept or not wanting certain dark feelings leads to all kinds of problems. So that makes total sense to me. But I can also think that, well, in general, I think that in states of life where I'm feeling better overall, I'm feeling more of the light ones, relatively speaking, versus there are certain times when I might have felt 90% of the dark ones, and that's off. So how do you, without this false model of you want to be 100% in the light zone, how do you have an idea of how you want to be feeling in general?
You don't always get to pick how you're going to be feeling. That's the first thing. So, as long as you acknowledge what it is that you're feeling, then you're okay. It's just from the acknowledgement, the witnessing of it with yourself. So just acknowledging that you're having a darker feeling is enough. Just acknowledging you're having a lighter feeling. But to act like you're not having any of the other ones, or you're not supposed to, that's where the problem comes in.
But then would you think of life as having some kind of emotional goal? Because most people would say, well, I want to be happy.
No, I do not believe that.
Okay, so I want to hear your view on that.
And that's the big part of the problem, is that everyone thinks they're supposed to be happy all the time.
Well, all the time might be a caricature of some people's view, because it could say that.
It's possible. I mean, I'm open to that, but I think that is the programming, is you're supposed to be happy, and it's supposed to be all the time. And if you go buy this, it'll make you happy. If you make this much money, it'll make you happy. If you go get this degree, it'll make you happy. If you get this girl or boy, it'll make you happy. Everything is geared around, especially for Americans, of joy chasing, happy chasing. And it gets you to buy stuff, bottom line. It makes you buy a lot of products, and it fits very nicely within a consumeristic society. I'm not anti-consumerism, I'm not anti-American, anti-capitalism, or whatever. I'm telling you that it all works together. We've evolved over time to have this really hardcore focus on, I must be happy, and if something is not making me happy, then it's a problem and it's got to go. That is not what life is about. It isn't. You're not supposed to be happy all the time. People have to give it up.
So what is the, if any,
when you
aspiration that you have?
Contentment.
Elaborate.
So contentment involves acknowledging all of the feelings and recognizing when you're having a dark one, acknowledge it, and you'll be amazed how quickly it passes if you just acknowledge it. And so if you start allowing yourself to feel all 8 core emotions, instead of this spiky kind of, I'm going to get some joy right now, I'm really happy right now, instead of trying to get that all the time, everything starts to kind of level out a little bit, and you have more of a feeling of kind of contentment, like you're riding a little bit of a wave. But it's not like in the Buddhist thinking of you watch your feelings go by. It's not that. You experience them and allow them to leave you. So remember I told you about these energy channels?
Mm-hmm.
So every time you don't allow yourself to have a feeling or acknowledge it, you're making a new block in the energy channel. It doesn't leave. It starts to gum up the works. If you just acknowledge whatever's going on, then that happiness focus starts getting replaced with, I'm having a human experience and I'm okay with this. And the weirdest part, like many things that are counterintuitive, is you experience more joy by allowing for the fact that you're not supposed to be happy all the time and that you're having these other feelings too. But that joy is what I would call more of a contentment. You know, like I get angry at things, I get afraid at things, I become ashamed. I also get very joyful, I have passion, all these different feelings. The thing is what I learned is if I just acknowledge them instead of acting like they weren't happening, that I became well, essentially, where I had contentment in a lot of ways. You know, and I hesitate to use myself as an example because I'm a work in progress too. I mean, I was so messed up, I had to make a process, for Christ's sakes. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, but I'm telling you, like this, it's a totally different experience. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, you know, part of what intrigued me about your approach even before I went to a workshop is the things that you said corresponded quite well to what I had observed in my own life. And in my mid-20s, I started getting different kinds of psychotherapy because I was having a lot of issues, and it was the last thing I had expected would happen. But I felt like there's just a lot that I could learn about myself, and I stuck with it for a long time, and I benefited a lot, but I learned very practically, at least to a certain extent, what had worked for me and what hadn't. And then I heard a lot of what you were saying resonated with my own experience. And so this is a really interesting perspective, and definitely the point about when I would have shame about certain emotions, that would not make me happier or certainly not more content in general. It in fact seemed to impede my ability to experience joy.
Yes.
When I impeded my ability to experience anger and shame.
And that's because your emotions exist on kind of a continuum. It's like an affective range, your ability to feel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so you try to get rid of one side of the range,
right,
which is these darker feelings. Well, you're messing with the whole mechanism, the whole range. So you stop being able to notice and feel the darker feelings, but you also start reducing your ability to notice and feel the lighter ones, because
right,
it's one mechanism in a person. What this work does is it re-expands the range. It increases your ability to feel. It gives you back the range that you need. And that way you can experience a full experience of joy, or a full experience of pain, a full experience of shame. You know, and that's why you noticed that, in my opinion. That's why you noticed it.
Interesting. So can I ask about how this applies to a couple of things?
Sure.
So for example, when you see somebody who experiences what's classified as OCD, so people will have certain compulsions or fixations or something like that.
Yeah, obsessive compulsive disorder. Yeah, it's an anxiety.
So they probably don't feel like this has anything to do with, you know, their child or their teen. It probably very much feels like what they're obsessed with, you know, if it's hand washing or something like that. So how does that connect to your framework?
It's going to blow your mind how simple it is.
Okay.
So essentially, the OCD response and those kinds of symptomology, it's literally just an effort to feel safe and secure through repetitive motion and repetitive doing. It's very consistent. It creates consistency in your life, which is something that you can count on. And that's not really how life works. Life is not super consistent all the time. There's a lot of fear in the person that develops OCD, or what is called OCD. It's simply a way to try to manage the fear that they're experiencing. And so they have a lot of fear, and it's because they had a lot of unsafe and a lack of safety when they were growing up.
So how do you deal with that?
Like I deal with everything else. You put it in the matrix, you identify the thoughts, you put it where it belongs.
So like you ask them the thoughts about the hand
fear.
washing?
Yeah. And the thought usually is something like, I have to do this.
Yeah.
Or it's not clean yet, or whatever it is. And that thought belongs to your child or teen, usually the teen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you work with the teen on it, wherever it corresponds in the matrix. And then the OCD starts to go down. I don't call it OCD, like I don't diagnose the way I used to, but I actually do have a specialty in diagnostics. I had a job once where I did that as my job. I would just diagnose people and write up reports. But yeah, OCD is fear in the child and an effort to control by the teen. So you work with the teen on the over-controlling and hyper-controlling, and you work with the child on the fear that's present that's even driving that kind of response. It's just a response. And see, it's characterized as this terrible pathological disorder, and it is terrible for people that have it. I had OCD type symptoms when I was dealing with intense anxiety in my mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to do some of that stuff. Well, it turns out it wasn't this huge problem I had. It was a natural symptom of the fact that I was terrified based on my experiences as a child. And so I would get triggered in my current life, and it wouldn't even be like directly correlated, but that stuff would get triggered, and then I would move into OCD behaviors. In other words, those original traumas were getting triggered. That's that lack of safety that I had. And so what we do is we go back and repair those. And then this really weird thing happens. You stop checking and rechecking everything. And it feels very strange to the person or the client that's going through that, because they've been doing these behaviors all this time. Then they simply stop doing it. And they're like, I don't want to do that anymore. This is so weird. Is this like voodoo, or like, what is this? And I'm like, well, you've been doing it this whole time. This is a natural, you don't have to have that response anymore because you've attended to the original problem, which is the fear you encountered as a kid.
Yeah, that makes total sense and is consistent with my experience. What about bipolar disorder? How does that relate?
Like it's like bipolar 1 and 2? Like mania and depression, or just mania?
Yeah.
Well, either way, it doesn't matter if you're talking about bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. So, I mean, similar in that they're responses. They're not the actual problem. It's a symptom. And so it's a cluster of behaviors that the person bounces into with this big emotional charge. Well, there are roots to that in their childhood. It does match up with the 4 core issues. So bipolar is a kind of a complicated type of thing. It's a series of responses, but you have teen responses and you have child responses driving it, just like an OCD. There's not, whatever the disorder is, the presentation, it can be worked on within this little bitty model that seems too simple. There is a teen that's acting it out, and there's a child that's having problems that the teen is then trying to take care of by having by having you as an adult respond in those ways. You know, there can be organic things going on around bipolar 2, like as well, where 1 or 2, where there are actual physical problems in the physiology that create these emotional pushes, and so that's true too, where people can have an organic problem. But I encourage people to try to work on what they're experiencing in a way where it's not medication management at first. Maybe it's more of a focus on, hey, I'm having large responses to things. I feel very, 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 very sad. But what they do is they say, I'm depressed. And I'm like, well, that's a diagnosis. So what is it that you're actually feeling? And that's very different, because the whole model is set up to be like, I'm a pathology. I'm bipolar. It gives me an identity, frankly, on one level. Then the other level is, oh, I have this problem and there's nothing I can do about it. It's like, well, but wait a minute. Aren't you just really, 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 really sad? And maybe you're suicidal too? That can be worked with. Depression, that's for a pill. And that's why it's focused on that, because, you know, everything's designed to give pills for. Makes billions and trillions of dollars for people.
So I was going to ask next about psychotropic drugs and what you think about those.
There is a place for psychotropics and psychoactive medication. I just think that a lot of times it's like trying to kill a mosquito with a shotgun. They're incredibly powerful drugs. They truly are very powerful. And it's only now that we're starting to see kind of like problems people have with those medications, especially in children. The other thing is that they stop working. And so there's already enough people of the baby boomer generation that have been on them for 20 years, and they just stop working. So then the person is left with how they kind of felt before. They just mask things. They're not a cure for anything. And a physician will tell you that too. I am not a physician, by the way, but a physician will tell you that as well. That it just masks what's going on. It doesn't actually change the triggering. It just cuts off your ability to feel the highs and the lows. And some people need that, but it's not a solution. It's not a permanent solution. You know, why those drugs were even invented was to get people off the sofa or out of their bed to then go see their psychiatrist. That was the original intention of the development of those drugs. It was to get people to go to therapy. But they worked really well. And so it became very clear that, like, we don't even go to therapy. We're just going to sell them all these drugs. And they don't do what they're supposed to do, and they all have side effects. Now, what's fascinating is the generalized kind of prescriptions given around things like Abilify, for example. That's an atypical antipsychotic. If they advertised it, which it shouldn't be advertised on TV anyway, as an atypical antipsychotic, I doubt people would want to take it. That drug, when I was young and like doing kind of rotation and those types of things and like learning, that was given in the psych ward only. And now you can just go pick it up. And in fact, you should add this other thing too. And so now there's these, oh, don't lose the progress you've made with your blank, 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 add Abilify. What they're not saying is your other drug isn't working anymore, so now take this stronger one. But don't lose the progress. It's all a bunch of bullshit. It's marketing.
So to go back to your story, you've mentioned this a couple of times in passing, but it seems like in general, as you've developed this framework, you've had really, really good results. So just talk about that and how consistent and how strong they are. And you don't need to be modest, but I'm just curious about the kinds of results you've seen over the last 5 to 10 years.
They've been profound, and they were scary at first, frankly, because I didn't understand why people were having such good results. The first person that I ever put through kind of a total thing, like where there was an intensive, then there was a way to learn from that intensive and then apply correction. I did that with this woman, and she was a nurse, or is a nurse probably still, and she was very overweight. And so she wasn't seeing me for that problem. She came in to see me because she basically wanted to get a divorce. And so she's like, that's the real reason she came in. But she also has some depression and other things. And so I put her through my initial intensive and started the sessions with her. And every time I would see her, she would be thinner. So I saw her every week, and every week she was a little thinner. And I started to get really nervous, and I became alarmed. And I was like, oh my God, I've created an eating disorder in this woman. I don't know how that's possible, but I've totally messed her up. I don't know what's going on. I better figure out, I got to fix it. So I kept trying to get her to admit that she had an eating disorder or that she was at least doing disordered eating. And she's like, no, you don't understand. And she kept telling me like 3 times. Finally, the 3rd time I was like, okay. She's like, I just don't want to eat that much anymore. I don't know why, and I don't know what you did, but I just don't want to do it. And she wasn't medicating anymore with food is what happened. She had gotten enough, quote, medication from what she had done in this process that she was no longer shoving that food down her little kid's throat. So that was like the first person. And so I was like, and she wanted me to make it a weight loss program. And I was like, this is not a weight loss program. I probably should have done that. I'd be retired by now. But she was like, it should be a weight loss program. And I was like, no, that's not what you really were here for. But it had all of these large effects for her. So I was like, okay, maybe that was just her. But it was exciting. The second person, very similar. Again, it was around eating. This was another female client, and she was doing overeating. And she stopped doing it. So basically I was like, that's weird. Is it just eating? You know what I mean? Like I was like, maybe it's just people that are over medicating with food. But they basically had all of these adjunct healthy reliefs, basically, like where they would just stop naturally doing something that was bad for them. And it's because they were starting to develop worth, actual worth. Because what this technique does, what this correction stuff does, is it actually starts to build actual self-worth, where you actually feel worthy. Because you're acknowledging yourself, what you think and feel through the lens of your kids, and you're reparenting and growing this worth in you.
Your kids is in your child and teen.
Yeah, sorry, your child and teen that's in you. Yeah, those kids, not your actual kids. But it helps you with them too. So the results were very dramatic from the beginning, and they continued to be, like where people would make more money, they would lose weight, but they were dramatic. Like people would be like, I've decided that I never loved my husband. And I'm like, what? They'd be like, I'm getting a divorce. And I'd be like, whoa. Let's slow down a little bit here. Like, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. It just creates a clarity for people that's profound and weird. Like, where all of a sudden you were telling yourself a certain story for a long time about lots of things, and then all of a sudden you're not telling yourself that story anymore. You start to see things for how they really are. And the first celebrity person, because I don't really do them as much anymore, but the first one I ever did, he was like, yeah, it's like a blindfold's been ripped off my face. It's really weird and kind of scary. I'm seeing things for how they really are, and I can't lie to myself about it anymore. And I was like, yep, but I'd already been doing it for years by the time I had worked with him. So they're profound results, but they're life-changing. And so what I have the opposite kind of thing in my coaching and therapy practice where I'm trying to get people to slow down. Like I'm like, look, let's not just blow up your whole life because you've learned that maybe you never really wanted to do that. Let's figure out how to do this appropriately. So it not being from a triggered place, but really being able to work through things. So they run the gamut. I mean, people have had health issues remit, people have had blood pressure changes. There are physical components to all of it because you're one being, your mind and your body, your spirit, it's all one thing. It's not all split up into different pieces. So everyone has physical components. People stop having like stomach issues, things like that. And then also just general better functioning in all life areas, particularly whatever they're working on at that time. So they're large results, basically.
And you work now a lot with executives, right? You do
yeah,
executive
I do a lot
coaching.
of executive coaching in businesses and entrepreneurs, and I really enjoy that as well. It's also part of why I gravitate towards it so much. Is I love using this framework to make changes within people's companies and also for them to grow their businesses. Because a lot of people, business is very triggering for people, and it's triggering in the same way as everything else in life. And it goes down to those 4 core issues and into those ego states. And if when I work with someone that's like owns a business and they're like, oh, I'm trying to make more money in the business, there are blocks along those 4 core issues that are hurting them, that are not enabling them to make more money. So everyone does the same kind of work, but what they choose to apply it to is up to them. So the executive work is very interesting because it has a lot of ramifications for a lot of people. If I work with someone, because I only work with people at the C-level or owners, when they make a change, it changes their entire business structure and it impacts all the people kind of below them or that are employed by them. That's very exciting to me. And I even go in and do trainings, like corporate trainings, where like I train the staff on learning the basics, and it changes the corporate culture. So I enjoy it very much. It's very exciting.
Yeah, well, one thing I know about you that I can somewhat relate to is that you've taken a commercial, and I think a virtuously commercial attitude toward a field that people don't often do that. Like with me in philosophy, like I make a lot more money than most philosophers, and I deliberately have a for-profit business where I try to take my insight and solve problems for people that they're willing to pay for.
Yes.
So,
well, I'm a business person.
yeah.
I mean, like that's the thing. It's like, and I don't make any bones about it. Like, making money is not a problem, especially if you are actually helping people to make change and do something better. So, but yeah, I mean, when I first started and told people like what I would charge and different things, they're like, "Are you crazy?" And I was like, "No. This is very valuable. It's going to make a lot of change for people." And, you should have financial health. And if you can create something that helps people, especially, good, go for it. And this isn't a charity, it's a business.
So speaking of the business, I know that I found out about you because maybe in the last year or so, you've been doing certain things to expand your methodology beyond just private clients. So you teach workshops and you do other things. Talk about how you're trying to spread your method to more people and how you're doing that, and ultimately how people can take advantage of it now.
Well, that's the main thing is that, this work, I built the entire business word of mouth, literally zero advertising, because it worked for people and they would tell other people. And over the years, people were like, how come you're not pushing this out? It would help so many people if you kind of did more. And I wasn't ready. I had my own insecurities, my own triggering around it along those core issues. And I wasn't really ready to do so. So last year, I think it was last year, I started a events company, essentially like a workshop and product company with a guy named Ian Stanley, who's actually a marketer by trade. And so that was a way to reach more people and do workshops. And that's even how I met you, was for you going to one of those Lionheart workshops. And so that's a way to do it. It's also at a price point people can, quote, afford. So it's definitely not what I charge. And so basically you can go to this workshop for 3 days and get a lot of change, a lot of insight, and learn the basics of basically this method. And then you leave with a way to actually apply. You learn how to do corrections as well. So the main reason was I wanted to reach more people. It also can make money too, which is good. I like multiple revenue streams. I like money. I don't have a problem with that, you know? So it can get products out for people. A healthy living can be made from that, and it gets the word out there. So I started doing the Lionheart stuff, which I really enjoy, and we actually have workshops. We have 4 intro workshops a year. 3 of them are in LA, and then one's in Austin this year. And there's advanced work you can do later if you wanted. That's in that same group format. So that's over here. That's one of the businesses. Then I have the original business, which is the one that I've built, which is the private work. And so there's corporate work that people can do. So corporations can hire me to come in and do corporate restructuring and cultural creation essentially for the companies, and then work with the executives on how they're triggered, because that can impact like stock prices and value. I mean, this has huge implications for people whenever they're emotionally off in business. So I do that corporate work, and then I offer groups in the private practice. So like basically I have a thing where I do one group a month of 4 people, and they get like 2 group calls a month along with that. So they do an intensive just like you would in the private work, but it's at like a half price point from what it costs to do the private work. So I do these groups, and then I have private clients that I work with. I'm going to start a newsletter. There's all these things that I haven't done that I need to do.
And a podcast at some
And
point.
we're in my podcast studio. I've never done a podcast in it. But I'm going to start a podcast in the summer, most likely. It'll probably be that long. And then I'm toying with the idea of putting some of this on social media, but I have a lot of issues with social media. I don't like it. I think it's toxic. But it might be good for business, at least Instagram or something, to get people exposed to it so that they could like learn from it. So the main thing is that even though there's groups offered, there's private work offered, there's newsletters, there's products, different things, I just want people to learn about it and maybe learn it at a basic level so they could just try to use it for themselves. Because it's something that you can use on your own. You don't need anybody else. You don't have to keep paying me or somebody else. You can internalize it, learn it, use it, see if it makes change for you. And then I'm coming out with a book too, but it probably won't be until the fall. So there's a book on money, a little money book that I'm putting out with my business partner in Lionheart. It's like a Lionheart Press book. But I'm going to do a larger book on this work that's really just almost like a manual. And I may talk about my own life as well in the book to illustrate the points. But I'm going to come out with that at the end of the year because I'm ready for that. Whenever you have made something that really does make change for people, I feel that there's a responsibility to put it out there. And then the other part is also to make money. It's both.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Don't you have, I believe there's an online version of the workshop now.
There is.
Right?
We have an online course, and it's in a beta version.
Yeah, I bought it.
Oh,
so.
you did?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So it's in a beta version. And that is you can buy that in like our members area of lionheartworkshop.com. That course is also going to be sold in the other business. It's just not ready. I'm kind of redo it a little bit, and I'm also going to sell it through my personal website, which is brentcharleton.com. Mm-hmm. But that's not going to come out until, I think, in 2 months. But the course can be purchased through lionheartworkshop.com.
Okay, so just so people know, the major websites to go to, lionheartworkshop.com, brentcharleton.com. Mm-hmm. And are there any other websites?
No. I mean, I think that's the best way to kind of do stuff. And my website also is not... It's not set up for purchases and all those things. It's more like a greeting card. It's like a card.
But is that if people want to go with you and be a private client?
Absolutely.
They can just go through there?
They can go through there, and then basically you just email me. And then I have an idea of kind of, maybe who you are, and I meet with people. It's like, I don't charge for consultations. I don't do any of that stuff. It's like, if you take the time to write me and you're really serious about it, then you'll get some information about it, and then people can set up a consultation. I am moving to more of an application basis, but that's not going to be for a while. So yeah, that would be the best way to find me is through my website, and then also the Lionheart products.
So we've introduced people to your framework in a little over an hour and a half now, and we've given them some resources they can go to. What do you think people can take just from today? Like if they're to take 1 or 2 points from today that could be useful to them just even now in their perspective, what would you say those should be?
All people want is witness and approval. Start witnessing the people in your life. Get off your damn phone. Witness people. Look at them in the eye and maybe say hi to them. That's a form of approval in and of itself. So one thing is just remember, all you want is witness and approval, and you should provide that for other people. The other thing is feel your feelings. You got 8 core emotions, just feel them, right? You don't have necessarily a way to do it. You got to get broken up a little bit. That's what that workshop is about. It kind of prepares you to be able to do that more, but you need to learn how to feel your feelings. The other thing is mind your own damn business. Like, there's this thing called boundaries, and you need to learn what they are, and you got to get some, where not everything that's done outside of you is about you. So people are entitled to their own thoughts and their own feelings, and that's up to them. If you don't like that, you're having a reaction to them. They're just the catalyst. Let them do whatever they want and work with yourself on the fact that you are triggered by it. It's not about making other people change. You've got to work with yourself. I could keep going, but I think those are like the main things.
Anything that I should have asked or you'd have liked me to ask during this session?
No. I actually don't have expectations of you in this. And anyone that I meet with and I do any podcast, I don't ever really have an idea of what they should or shouldn't do.
That's actually a bad question. It's interesting because I've never asked that before. I've been asked that, and the reason I liked it I realized that I don't like the implication of it, but the reason I liked it as a question is sometimes when I'm being interviewed, there's just one point on my mind, and I think, I really want the audience to have this, so I like that. But you're right. When I put it as, I should have asked you, it's like,
well, I don't even approach interviewing that way. Like, I basically just show up. I mean, it's just, I just show up. And that's the thing is, one of the things that's been so great about this work and doing this with myself and other people is that you start to just be more relaxed and solid. Like, where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to show up and find out. And you know what? It really is going to be okay because I can handle it, whatever it is. That's because I have worth. And the more worth you have, the more able you are to show up and kind of let your little light shine. Like when I was a kid in church, be like, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what you're supposed to be doing. You're actually supposed to be showing it. People that are most successful, by the way, are people that are in their element. So in other words, they are themselves, and that's okay for them, and they're expressing who they are through their work or through whatever it is that they're doing. That who is most successful. And that is why all the clients I see, literally all the ones that I see that focus on career, become more successful. It's not because we're training them on certain skills. It's because they're starting to have a sense of worth, and they own who they are, and then they feel comfortable because they have boundaries to express that. And that's what it takes. So there's all this stuff about be yourself. Well, yeah, but you have to learn how to be able to do that. And then things happen. The money comes. Success comes from that, from whatever it is that you're doing to express yourself. The other thing is people taking pride in their work, whatever it is. I think that's so important because that's an expression of who you are too. A lot of people don't do that anymore. It's like, this is just this job, this thing that I have to do. When I first, and I'll be quick, but when I was a kid, I ran away from home a couple times. But when I was 18, I moved to Portland, Oregon with 2 suitcases and $150. And I lived in my dorm room of my friend from high school. And I scraped bean dip off plates at a fast food Mexican restaurant. I'm not saying that because I'm so great or look at me or how far I've come. What I'm saying is I did that well. And I think that's all the difference, is just kind of like, take pride in what you do and express yourself in whatever capacity you're able to do so. And then that can change. You don't have to keep scraping bean dip off plates. But I did to survive, and I was determined to do a good job, even though I got made fun of every day by everybody because I was the bus boy.
I like it. Well, it's good that you were able to find satisfaction from that, and I'm glad you found satisfaction from this because I think this can be valuable to a lot of people. So Brent, I really want to thank you for coming on the show and for sharing your system with us.
You are very welcome, and thank you. It was really enjoyable, Alex. It was good talking to you.
All right, just going to wrap up the show here. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this. I'm really excited to be able to bring guests when I think they have interesting systems, because anytime we get a thoughtful guest who's really been working on a system and testing it with people, there's going to be a lot that we can learn from it and apply, and that's why I wanted to bring Brent here. Feel free to suggest any guests to me if you have any, as usual, any questions, comments, love mail or hate mail. You can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. You can discuss this episode on the Facebook page at facebook.com/humanflourishingproject and get on our mailing list at humanflourishingproject.com. Next week, we'll be back with another great topic. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.